Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome to this edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your host today, Steve Francisco, and it's a real pleasure to welcome back a return visitor to our set today, the Chief of the Eagan Fire Department, Mike Scott. Welcome back, Mike.
Thanks, Steve. Doesn't seem like we were that long ago that I was here visiting with you.
And it wasn't that long ago. We were just talking about the fact that Mike was our guest on the show back in June of last year. But there have been a few big developments at the Eagan Fire Department since we last visited. The fire department is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, half a century old, and there are some changes underway in our Eagan City Fire Department. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that are happening right now in the fire department.
Sure, Steve. So we're like most volunteer departments. I think one of the, we talked about it last year, but I think it's good to get out again, that a lot of citizens don't realize that Eagan has the second largest volunteer department in the state of Minnesota. The largest is Bloomington. Most people would think that we have full-time fire departments.
And Bloomington is what, third largest city in the state?
Correct.
Yeah.
So they're authorized 175 volunteers. We're authorized about 110 volunteers, which is a change because we used to be authorized 150, and I'll kind of touch on that. But volunteer departments across the state and across the nation are experiencing a big decrease in people that have the time to volunteer. So we're seeing a large turnover in our volunteer staff. For Eagan, for the last several years, we've been losing 15 volunteers per year, which is pretty alarming. So we're obviously concerned about that and want to do something before it becomes a crisis, but losing that many firefighters each year is a cost to the city, not only in tax base money, but also just the amount of time we put into all the firefighters and then have them leave each year.
So what are some of the key reasons that we're losing these volunteers? Because I assume they go through some degree of training and there's some expense to the city in getting folks trained in so they can do this kind of work too. What are the reasons people are having to leave?
So people come to us, they don't have to have any experience. We do all the training in-house. So when they come to us, just to talk about the cost for a minute, because a lot of times I'll get to the comment, well, they're volunteers, hire some more. It's what's the big deal? Because it's not costing us anything, but there is a cost to it. So we do all the training. We have to buy them all their gear. And gear nowadays it's called turnout gear. So it's pants, boots, coats, helmets, Nomex hood. One set of gear costs about $2,500.
To outfit one firefighter.
One firefighter, and it has to be custom fitted. It's not like when I started in 1983, they told me to go into a room and pick out a coat that was pretty close and some pull-up boots, like the hip boots. And it wasn't one size fit all, but it was small, medium, large, essentially. Well, today you have to custom fit gear. So if I'm leaving the department, you can't just fit into my gear. I mean, you have to have gear that's fitted for you, and that's to protect the firefighter. And obviously we want to make sure we're protecting the firefighter, not only for their safety, but for liability reasons for the community as well. So we put, when somebody starts on the department, there's about 18 months of training. They become EMS, so rescue trained, firefighter trained. They got to know how to drive and pump with the trucks. We have all the same training requirements as a career or a full-time firefighter.
Are firefighters licensed the way police officers are?
So there's two different things. There's licensing. If you're a career, a full-time firefighter, you get a license. If you're a paid-on-call or volunteer firefighter, you get a certificate. But the training requirements are the same. It's different lingo for it. But we put on a class every year. We add between 10 and 15 people a year, depending on how many applicants we can get that qualify to become volunteers. And again, we're losing about 15 a year. So I do an exit survey for everybody that leaves the department. And the number one reason for leaving the department is time commitment. It's just becoming more of a time commitment. I always use the example of, I grew up on the department. My dad was a firefighter starting in 1971. And when my dad was on the department, there was the fire department, and then there was the rescue squad, it was called. You could be on both if you wanted to be, but you didn't have to be. But now if you think about it, if you fast forward, well, first back in the 70s, most moms were stay-at-home moms, so they worked out of the house. Kids' activities were, if you wanted to play ball, you went down to the park to see if anybody was down there that wanted to play. But now if you think about both spouses work at least one job, if not two jobs.
Right.
There's a lot more organized kids' activities, so your home life commitment is huge.
And the kids' activities seem to be very structured. A lot of young parents that we know, their schedules seem to be dictated by the kids' sports schedules, ice hockey time or whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going out, in different areas of the state, for different tournaments.
Right.
But at the same time, our requirements to be a firefighter have changed, so it's become more professionalized, which is good. I think it's good that we're trained the same as a full-time firefighter. You shouldn't know the difference if a full-time firefighter shows up or a paid-on-call firefighter shows up. They have the same training. But now everybody has to be either a first responder or EMT for medical emergencies, because that's a huge growing area for any fire department. You have to be hazmat certified. Think of all the changes since 9/11, all the requirements for the fire department. And if you think about any community, if you have an emergency and it doesn't quite fit a certain category, who do you call? You call the fire department.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of different training requirements now that we didn't 20 years ago, but everybody's home life is much busier.
Right. And the fire department's responsibilities in Eagan, your responsibilities are increasing in terms of coverage because we're adding more population. We have some new business developments, some of which are about to open this year. The new, Paragon Outlet Mall that's going to be opening in the city of Eagan, in addition to some new apartment complexes that are opening too. So still covering the city of Eagan, but more people to protect in terms of fire protection and first aid and other emergencies.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. So the type of buildings coming in definitely affect our call volume, and then our demographics. So Eagan is aging. As the population ages, we have more medical emergencies. So the types of calls change over time. So not only the volume of calls, but the types of calls that we respond to.
That's an interesting point, because I recall when I interviewed you last summer, I was a little bit surprised to find out that actually it's those types of calls, it's the medical emergency calls, that are actually more prevalent for the fire department than actual fire calls in the city of Eagan. Is that right?
That's right, and we'd like to take a little bit of credit for the fire calls going down. We have a huge community outreach program, fire prevention. We try to get out into businesses and do a lot of public meetings throughout the year to try to reduce the risk of fires. So we'd like to take credit, although I think that's a lot of other things into that. But yeah, absolutely, in any city, the medical calls are the largest increase. So again, aging population, more people on the streets, faster speeds, so car accidents. This winter, of course, with all the ice that we had and snow, it was an interesting year for
been a tough winter that we've just been through, and even though the calendar says it's spring, it may not quite look like it out there. But I want to ask you about something related to this transition between the seasons right now. The thermometers are starting gradually to go up. We're seeing some 40, even 50-degree days in our future. The ice is starting to melt. Isn't there some danger that we need to remind parents and kids and everybody, be really careful? We have a lot of lakes and ponds in the city of Eagan, and children or adults even walking on this ice as it's beginning to melt. I live in back of Heine Pond off Diffley, and just driving by today I noticed for the first time that there's open water there. So good thing for us to be aware about the ice, the thin ice, and the dangers of people falling into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the water.
And another example of something that some people don't realize that the fire department does, but we have a pretty big water and ice rescue component to our department. So we have 2 boats, and then we have a couple of devices for ice rescue. But every spring, it seems like, we have a water rescue emergency related to the thin ice. And what it's been recently in the last couple of years is somebody's dog might run out on the ice, and somebody goes after their dog thinking that they need to help them get off the ice, and we'd really warn people not to do that. Now, dogs are pretty smart. They knew how to get out there, and it might take them a little bit of coaxing, but they'll come off the ice or call us and we'll help get your dog off the ice. Let the
But don't
professionals
go
do it.
after the dog yourself.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's happening in Eagan and again a lot of other communities is you'll see aerators on the ponds. So there's open water year round, even in the middle of the winter. There's small sections of open water. And the city does a really nice job of marking that with thin ice signs. But the reason they do that is for the water quality, to improve the water quality of the lakes and for the fish. But sometimes people disobey those signs and go out a little bit further than they're supposed to. So we've had a couple of emergencies related to those types of things too.
I want to go back to fires for a second, just going through this really tough winter that we've been through here in Minnesota. Recently, the fire chief up in Minneapolis, John Frutel, is it?
Correct,
Did I pronounce that correctly? He held a news conference where he announced that in the city of Minneapolis, there have been 10 deaths related to fires this year already since January 2014. 5 of those involve children.
Correct.
Fatalities. The highest number of fire fatalities in the city of Minneapolis in 35 years. We're not as big as Minneapolis, but even Eagan had a fatality during the past year, didn't we? Fire-related.
Correct, and it was my pleasure to be with the chief in Minneapolis when he was talking about that, because the messages that he was getting out, and it relates to not only our fatality, but a recent fire that was very close to being our second fatality. Both of them, in Eagan's situation and in many of the Minneapolis cases, didn't have working smoke detectors. So over time they didn't either maintain their detectors or they removed them because the batteries were dead in them and they were starting to chirp. And we'd ask that people never remove their smoke detectors. Smoke detectors are there to buy time for you to safely get out of the residence. And by removing them, I mean, you're putting yourself and your family in danger.
And when you mentioned that chirping sound, I actually just heard that in my house the other day and ran downstairs and took the old battery out and plugged in a new 9-volt battery. So when you hear that, that's your signal it's time to change that battery. But how about a more regular schedule? Don't you advise people to change the batteries out even if they don't hear the chirp? How often do you change them out?
You should change them at least annually. You should either do it with daylight savings time, either in the spring or the fall. I do mine every spring. The other thing that we get a lot of times is people will say, well, I have hardwired detectors. I have a newer home. I have hardwired detectors, so I don't need to change my batteries. All smoke alarms have a battery backup. Because if you think about it, if you lose power to your home,
you have no protection.
You have no protection.
So you should change that battery.
Absolutely, and everybody has batteries. So if you think you don't have batteries, you have a problem because your batteries are probably dead.
And what about somebody who's just moved into their house, or they just bought a new house and they moved their family in, and they're thinking, well, what rooms do I put the smoke detector in? What do you tell folks? What's the advice about where you put the smoke detectors in a house?
Sure, and so smoke detectors you have to have in every bedroom. Every room that somebody's going to be sleeping in, and then on every floor. Probably the best thing to do for smoke alarms is to call the fire department, and we'd be happy to either give advice on the phone or come out and take a look at your home and give advice as to how to do that. The other one I want to mention is CO alarms. So carbon monoxide, which is the deadly killer, as they call it, silent killer.
You can't smell it, you can't detect it.
Correct. And now there's a state law that you need one of those on every sleeping floor. And in my house, I've got one on every floor, and then I put one by the furnace. You can get ones that plug into the wall. You can get battery-operated ones. You can get several different types.
Right.
They have about a 5-year life because they're always smelling, if you think about that. They're always sniffing. And after a while, their filters in there just become bad.
Yeah.
So you should replace them after 5 years. And smoke detectors in your house, they recommend a 10-year life.
And on smoke detectors, I was just reminding myself here too, we put a smoke detector in our laundry room as well because we have the washer and dryer in there. And I know there have been a lot of fires associated with dryers, haven't there?
Yeah, there's always a number of dryer-related fires, and again, it's just doing the maintenance on your dryer, so cleaning out the lint from the filters.
And there are companies that'll come out and do that for you. Of course, you have to pay them, but they'll come out and take the hose out and suck the old lint out, so it reduces the risk of a fire, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Still, the top two causes of fires in a residence, though, are kitchen-related fires, so cooking fires left unattended, and then discarding smoking material inappropriately.
Yeah, and in addition to smoke detectors and CO2 detectors, you recommend that people also have some fire extinguishers at their residence. Where should they put the fire extinguishers?
So I always recommend that you have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen area, and then probably one by your garage or your exit to your garage.
Makes sense.
And then, if you're looking for a third spot, that laundry room area is not a bad spot as well. The important thing with fire extinguishers is it's one step to buy them, but show people in your house, including your kids, how to use them. And again, that's something that we have a fire extinguisher demonstrator, and at our community events we show folks how to use fire extinguishers. You'd be surprised at how many adults have never touched one, and there's a certain technique to a fire extinguisher that is important to use. And then make sure you're checking, there's always a little gauge on them, make sure you're checking that they're charged properly.
Isn't part of correct use of a fire extinguisher, it's aim at the base of a fire, sweeping motion?
Correct.
Isn't it?
Yep, aim at the base and sweeping motion, and just knowing how to pull the pin and that you got to push the lever down at the same time.
Right. And also learning a little bit about the differences. People don't need to be expert firefighters, but knowing that there's a difference between how you would fight an electrical fire versus how you'd fight some other substance that might be burning, like wood or paper, right?
Yeah.
And people can look this information up too on the internet and check with the fire department if they have questions.
Absolutely. We have a lot of information on our website. Otherwise, they can always call us if in doubt. The one that I really want to throw out there is cooking fires. If you have a grease fire, you never want to use water.
Right.
It can cause an explosion. As a matter of fact, we just, Dakota County Fire Chiefs Association just got a kitchen fire demonstration trailer donated by Flint Hills Refinery. It's going to be based in Eagan, and it's going to be used by departments throughout the county.
Now, something that a lot of our viewers may not be aware of, residents in Eagan, is that we have a green fire department. You've actually won some national recognition for this. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our Fire Safety Center, which is almost 4 years old now, it's hard to believe that it's that almost 4 years old, but it's the first Green Globe certified fire station in the United States. And Green Globes is a lot like LEED certification. I'm sure more people are usually familiar with LEED certification than Green Globes. Green Globes has actually been around longer, but it was a Canadian-based certification program. It's a lot less money than getting LEED certification, so that's why the city chose to go that route. It was a neat program to go through, and it's the same types of things that you have to do with LEED certification, to have an independent source come and look at what items are green and making sure that you're doing them properly. So some of the highlights of the Fire Safety Center, it's heated by geothermal, heated and cooled by geothermal. So we have 64 wells in the parking lot that heat and cool the building. That had about a 7-year payback. So we always looked at things that had a fairly quick payback when we're using tax dollars, obviously. There's a lot of use of natural light throughout the facility, so we don't have to use lights unless it's...
Not using electricity then, saving, and that's ultimately saving residents in Eagan money too, right?
Correct.
Because you're running more environmentally friendly and environmentally energy efficiently. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we replaced 2 older facilities with this new station, and even though it's a much larger footprint than the 2 buildings combined, it's costing us less per year for operational costs.
And does this extend to the fire trucks too? Is there something we can do there, or that you're doing there in terms of more energy efficient?
A little bit. The big trucks are hard because of the pumps and the drivetrains. You can't really do the hybrid on there, but we do have one hybrid fire vehicle. It's a pickup truck. It was donated by Gopher Resources in Eagan, and our fire marshal uses it. So we're kind of doing an evaluation not only for the fire department but for the city to see if hybrid technology for vehicles makes sense for our type of use. So it's nice to try the different things and see how it works.
Mike, as you know and our viewers know, there have been some really horrific tragedies around the country related to industrial accidents, chemical explosions, large-scale fires that have had really devastating consequences. I'm thinking particularly a big fire down in Texas this past year and a few other places. Eagan and Dakota County is covered by a network of underground pipelines that carry hazardous materials. Some of those carry natural gas, some of those carry petroleum products. And you're well aware of this. I don't know if our viewers know, there's this whole infrastructure underground of hazardous material that's moving. What does the fire department do in terms of taking proactive action to make sure that those pipelines are operated safely and so that residents in our communities are protected?
Well, obviously, we work hand in hand with the gas companies. There's several gas companies that have large supply lines going through Eagan. Then we have the refinery, Flint Hills Refinery, that has large feeder lines going through the community, including jet fuel that goes out to the airport to feed Sun Country, of course. So we work with all those organizations to understand what's going through our community, and then if we do have an emergency, what our response would be. And actually, we were just tested on that about 2 weeks ago. We had a 12-inch gas line over by the Blue Cross Blue Shield facility that had a small gas leak in it, and it was probably related to the frost. The frost is so deep this year; it's much deeper than it normally is. And then probably a little bit of the age of the line. Some of the lines have been in here since the 1960s. They do have requirements to test them on a regular basis. If you look, throughout the community, if you look at aerial shots, you can see where their vegetation is actually cut down. You'll see swaths of trees and
where the
grass.
pipeline went through?
Where the pipeline went through, but they keep it cut down so they can detect leaks quick. In this particular case, we worked hand in hand with 2 different gas companies. It's hard to quickly shut down a 12-inch gas line. If you shut it down too quickly, you can create more danger. So we had to evacuate a small residential area.
This happened recently?
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. We go in, we have gas detectors in all of our trucks so we can tell what the level of gas is. And then slowly the gas line was shut down, and then a construction crew had to come up and dig up the line and repair it.
Yeah.
So, but luckily, through our training and working with the companies ahead of time, we didn't have any dangers at all as far as an explosion, or nobody was hurt, so that was a good outcome.
Right. I recall there was an accident about 3 years ago. I happened to be out in San Francisco at the time, and the community of Millbrae, which is situated just right next to SFO, to the airport in San Francisco. And there was a huge explosion, and people thought an airplane had crashed. In fact, what they discovered shortly thereafter was that a PG&E gas line had exploded in a residential community. And what kind of coordination do you have with these gas companies here in terms of if they notice like something irregular in the pressure on their lines that they monitor? They're required to report that to you, aren't they?
Absolutely. They have a ton of regulations that are
and both state and federal?
Correct. Yeah, and we work more with the state locally, but so that's how all the pipelines are required to do training with emergency response officials each year. They're required to report any type of irregularities with their lines, and again, they're required to have a response team and help us do what we need to do. So, even though there's lots of pipelines, they're not as concerning to me that there'd be a large-scale emergency, but it's because of all the training and preparation ahead of time that I feel.
And because of zoning laws too in Eagan, fortunately, we do have some separation generally between industrial areas, like where the refinery is, versus residential areas, but they're not too far apart, and depending on what the nature of an emergency would be, it could be something serious. So
correct, and then like you said earlier, the pipelines, even though they start out in a commercial area or an industrial area, sometimes they're going through a residential area to get to where they need to go. The line I mentioned, that 12-inch line, that's a large line. Just to give you an idea, it was 80% of the capacity to supply Eagan was in that one line.
Oh my goodness, that's pretty significant.
Significant line.
Yeah. I want to jump back to something because I'm just realizing in our opening discussion, I don't know if you had mentioned about the addition of some personnel for the first time ever, not first time ever, but first time recently, some new full-time personnel. Tell us about that.
Sure. So like we mentioned in the opening, Eagan is one of the largest paid-on-call fire departments in the state. We've never had full-time firefighters, so we have 4 full-time administrative staff, including myself and 2 deputy chiefs and 1 inspector, but we've never had full-time fire response staff. And because of our challenge with continuous turnover of volunteers, and if you think about it, most of our volunteers are available in the evening hours because most people work during the day. So weekdays is our toughest time to get volunteer firefighters, but it's our busiest time. So our call volume starts to go up around 8 a.m. and it peaks around 6 p.m. But that same time, 8 a.m. to about 5 p.m. is our lowest availability for volunteers. So Eagan applied for a national grant. It's called SAFER, Staffing Adequately for Emergency Response. It's a FEMA grant. There was 1,500 applications nationwide, and we ranked number 6 nationally to get a grant. Thank you.
Says something good about our fire department then.
Yeah, in our need, Minnesota's unique. We're the 9th largest city in the state, and for a city of 65,000 people, to not have any full-time firefighters is unheard of in other areas of the country. As a matter of fact, the coordinator for the FEMA grant said that when the reviewers were reviewing the grant that I had put in, they weren't sure that I was being honest, that we didn't have any full-time firefighters, so they had to go on our website and look, and we're just amazed. So what that means for the community is we're saving about $3 million a year. So to have a full-time, 100% full-time department for Eagan would conservatively be $3 million a year. So we've saved a lot of money over the years, but at the same time, I think we've provided an excellent service. So
where are the 5 new firefighters? How do you have them deployed in the city? Where are they at?
So they'll be functional May 1st. We just finished the hiring process today, as a matter of fact. So it'll be 1 captain and 4 firefighters. They'll be divided into 2 crews. They'll work 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and there'll be an east crew and a west crew. Essentially, Pilot Knob Road will divide the city. And when they're not responding to calls, it's not like the Emergency Squad 51 show where they're back watching TV and waiting for a call. Because we only have 1 fire inspector for a community of our size, they're going to be out doing fire inspections of existing commercial buildings, apartments, schools, our high-risk buildings, and they'll also be doing fire prevention, community risk reduction, so fire extinguisher training, all that stuff that we've been talking about.
Right. And our firefighters, I know you have them regularly going out to the schools, too, and talking to kids in the schools about what they can do to help their parents keep their houses safe and what they can do themselves.
Absolutely. We're always trying to get out into the schools as often as possible. For sure, every October during Fire Prevention Month, but we try to get out as often as we can.
Well, I think it's pretty plain to people who've lived in Eagan for any length of time. I've been in the community now 11 years. One of the best things about living in this city is, frankly, the quality of public services, and that includes the quality of our fire department and our police protection, the quality of parks. All these things add up to quality of living, and it's a good thing for our city. And also, because we have such a good record with fire safety in Eagan for the most part, doesn't that help homeowners too in terms of lower insurance rates?
You're reading my mind, Steve. Eagan has one of the lowest insurance ratings in the state. So every year, every 5 to 10 years, every community is ranked on their fire protection. It's called ISO. Insurance service offices come in and they do an independent audit of your fire department, your response, water supply. The rankings rank from a 1 to a 10, 1 being the best and 10 you don't want. There's not any city in the state that has better than a 3 rating, and that has to do with our weather and the type of water systems we have.
Right.
And Eagan is one of 34 cities, I believe, that are a 3. So, not only do I think we have an excellent fire department, but you have an independent source coming in every so often and ranking us, and again we have one of the best ratings, and that's out of 784 fire departments, I believe.
Oh, in the state?
In the state.
Oh,
so
okay.
we're pretty proud of that, and that does equal lower insurance rates for not only our homes but for
our businesses too. Yeah.
So it's an attraction for businesses.
Good. Well, Mike Scott, Eagan Fire Chief, thanks again for coming back and sharing your knowledge with Access to Democracy, and thanks to you and the men and women volunteers and now full-time firefighters who keep our community safe. Thanks for all that you do for Eagan and the people who live here. And come back and visit us again.
Sounds good, Steve. Thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.